see, Doris Kearns Goodwin is a museum-quality specimen of a court historian, an intellectual or pseudo-intellectual who is devoted to pulling the wool over the public's eyes by portraying even the most immoral, corrupt, and sleazy politicians as great, wise, and altruistic men. What's behind that statement?
I went through all the research from the internet on how Doris Kearns Goodwin essentially admitted plagiarism, and she was taken off the air. She was a usual commentator on the presidency on network television for years, and she was taken off the Pulitzer Prize committee because of the plagiarism. And she laid low for a couple of months, and then she's back on television telling us who we should vote for president and pontificating about all these sorts of issues. And so that's one of the reasons why I thought this is sort of odd. And she just written this big book on Lincoln called Team of Rivals. I think it's a 960-page book. You probably have interviewed her. But I'll give you one example of what I mean there. And when Lincoln was inaugurated, in his first inaugural address, he pledged his support for a constitutional amendment that had already passed the House and the Senate that would have forbidden the federal government from ever interfering in Southern slavery. And not only did he support that, it's right there in his first inaugural address, but he orchestrated the whole thing. After he was elected, he got William Seward, who would become his Secretary of State, to get this through the Senate. And Doris Kearns Goodwin writes about this, as I do. I look at this, these facts, that Lincoln was willing to see slavery exist enshrined in the Constitution, and it had never been explicitly in the Constitution, long after his own lifetime, as far as he knew. And I thought that was an immoral act. I think that's not only an immoral act, but it's one of these things where it's been kept from Americans. I still get emails from people challenging me to show them where this amendment is. It's called the Corwin Amendment, named after a member of Congress. Doris Kearns Goodwin writes about the same thing and praises Lincoln for it because she claims it helped him keep the Republican Party together by doing this. And the theme of her whole book is what a clever political manipulator Lincoln was, and it kept the party together. My view of that is that a clever political manipulator can be a horribly dangerous thing. How do you get to be a clever political manipulator? Well, you're an expert liar and conniver. That's my view of it. And so people who write books about liars and connivers in politics and praises them, I'm a little dubious of their reputations. I don't think they deserve the respect that they sometimes get in their profession or in the public.
What's a museum-quality specimen of a court historian? You write about court historians a lot.
Court historian is somebody who's sort of on the payroll of the king, and so to speak, and so writes in support, provides intellectual support for what the king wants to do. Of course, we don't have a king; we have a president and a Congress, but that's what a court historian is meant. Somebody who writes sort of propaganda to prop up the state, to make the state look a little better than it really is. When I write about the Church of Lincoln, a lot of what motivates, I think, a lot of the so-called Lincoln scholars is using the whole Lincoln legend to prop up their version of the state. In my book, Lincoln Unmasked, I mention Eric Foner, who's a well-known Columbia University historian, been on television a lot on Civil War shows. And I quote him in an article in 1991 in The Nation magazine where he opposed the breakup of the Soviet Union. And the title of the article was Lincoln's Lesson. He basically argued that Gorbachev was a softie. He allowed the Soviet republics to secede peacefully, but our Abraham Lincoln would not have done that. And he was apparently upset about that. And so he's using sort of the Lincoln legend to promote his agenda of big centralized government. He's a self-described Marxist among historians, and as a Marxist, he's probably not a fan of decentralized government. And so on the right, I criticize a lot of people on the right, like Newt Gingrich, for example. An article in the he's a historian, PhD in history, an article in the Wall Street Journal Online a couple of years ago, advocating that we Americans invade Iran, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Syria, and North Korea. I think, and the title of the article was Lincoln and Bush. And he started out with a quotation of Abraham Lincoln, and he was trying to attach the reputation of Lincoln to his agenda, Newt Gingrich's agenda of invading all these countries with a military occupation. And so you have people on both sides of the political spectrum that I've written about that I call court historians who try to use the history of Lincoln in particular, to promote their own particular agenda, whatever it is, left and right.
You said, I've also learned that there is only one genuine Lincoln scholar in America.
You really get a distinct difference in David Donald's books. That it's for someone like me who's been an academic for 28 years, I can tell when I'm reading a book by a scholar if this person is really pursuing the truth, if that's what motivates this person to pursue the truth, or if he has some sort of agenda he's trying to promote and twisting the truth. And just of all the Lincoln scholars I've read, David Donald is my favorite mainstream scholar. You learn a lot from him, and more than any of the others, I think. You read other books about Lincoln, they'll take a 700-word speech and write an entire book about it. And that in itself sounds kind of dubious to me, because what's usually done is they'll take a sentence by sentence and then interpret for you what you should think about this sentence. And that may or may not be useful. My experience has been a big waste of time to read books like that. But you never get any of that with someone like David Donald. And so I'm a big fan of his work as far as all the mainstream historians are concerned.
What do you think is driving most of, and depending on what figure you use, Andrew Ferguson wrote about you in his book, Land of Lincoln, where he said there's some 14,000 books written about Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
What's the motivation, and how much of it is making money?
All these books? There's a whole group in the academic world. There are Lincoln Book Awards. If you want a career as a historian, as an academic historian, and you want to write books and get book contracts from big publishers, whether it's a big university publisher or commercial, you'll get letters of recommendation to do that from all the big shots in the Lincoln world, if you are what I call a member of the Church of Lincoln. But if you're a dissenter, you cannot have a career. You cannot have a career as an academic historian if you're a critic of Abraham Lincoln. You won't get a job. No one will hire you. Maybe you can teach high school somewhere, but you can't if you get a PhD in history doing research that is critical of Lincoln. You can write a dissertation that's critical of Thomas Jefferson, of George Washington, of any other president, but not Abraham Lincoln. And when my book first came out, and rather than arguing with me, a lot of academics started personally attacking me.
What do you say about you?
Well, he's lying. He made this up, made this or that up. I'm not that foolish that I'm publishing a book on Abraham Lincoln that I have to get away with something like that. When my book first came out in 2002, over Lincoln, I had an email from a syndicated columnist, Paul Craig Roberts, who wrote a blurb for the back of the book, and he said, "You're destroying their human capital. That's why they're attacking you." And what he meant, human capital is a word we economists use for your sort of your body of knowledge, your body of your education, your skills, and so forth. And so you have a lot of people who have spent careers writing books and articles, sort of deifying Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln and his so-called colonization idea. He had this fetish almost about colonizing free black people and sending them to Liberia, Africa, anywhere but here. And Lincoln's idea actually about equality, he said it many times, that he didn't believe black people could actually be equal in America. Back in what he called their native clime, Africa or Haiti or someplace like that, Lincoln said they could be equal but not here. And so this young man, Philip Magnus, who sent me the article, essentially showed that almost up to his dying day, Lincoln was working on this. He was working on what to do with the freed slaves after the war, and he was wondering, do we have enough ships to send them, to deport them to essentially to some other place? And during his presidency, he did actually allocate several $1 million to send some free black people to Liberia in Africa. But the man he put in charge of it turned out to be an embezzler, and so nothing much came of that. And he held a meeting of some free black men in the White House during his administration, urging them to lead by example and leave the country and go to Liberia again. And these men wisely said, no thanks.
Another one of your columns, you said Lincoln was personally corrupt as well.
Yes, well, one example is there's an old book that was published in the 20s and recently reprinted called Lincoln and the Railroads. And Lincoln was an attorney for all the main railroads in the Midwest. He was offered the job of general counsel of the New York Central Railroad, and that, of course, is not corrupt. That's a perfectly legitimate thing. But one of the things that I found in this book was that Lincoln bought a bunch of land in Council Bluffs, Iowa in 1857. And around the same time, he was offered the job of the general counsel of the New York Central Railroad at a pay of $10,000 a year, which was a very princely sum in those days, 1857. And he turned it down. And then a few years later, after he got elected president, one of the first things he did was to call a special session of Congress, and the war had started, to get the ball rolling on the Pacific Railroad bill. And the bill passed about a year or so later, and the bill gave the president the right to determine the eastern terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad. And guess where he chose? He chose Council Bluffs, Iowa. And I gave a speech in Springfield, Illinois last year, and I visited Lincoln's home. And he lived on a place now in Springfield. It's called Old Aristocracy Row, and he lived in the biggest house in Old Aristocracy Row. And his law offices are still there. Lincoln and Herndon law offices are about about 100 paces from the old state capitol building in Springfield. And so he was essentially a lobbyist, the way we would think of him today for the railroad companies. And that in itself is not corrupt, but I think he did demonstrate some corruption in his career.
What do you think of the bicentennial 200-year celebration of his birth?
Well, it's going to be quite a big party, I guess. I know there's a commission with all the big shot Lincoln scholars on this commission, and they've already begun publishing things and putting on television shows about it. People ask me, since I'm sort of a big Lincoln critic, people ask me if I think he should be on Mount Rushmore, and I tell them I don't think anyone should be on Mount Rushmore because of what I said earlier, that I think it's unhealthy for society to deify politicians, even the ones I like Thomas Jefferson. I think it's just unhealthy to deify politicians like that. And so this whole 200th anniversary is sort of like that. It's mostly a celebration of the American state. I don't think it's the people on this commission are so in love with Abraham Lincoln or the government that is funding it. A lot of government money going into it. I think it's sort of a celebration of itself with regard to the government. The federal government is putting all this money behind this celebration, and so and a lot of the people will go along with this. But I think that's unhealthy for society.